A $4 coil of copper wire wound by hand and grounded into bare earth can pull usable electrical current from the ground beneath your feet. And the industry charging you $200 a month in electricity bills does not want you thinking too hard about that. This isn't a magic trick. It's not a hoax. It's a principle that legitimate electrical engineers have understood for well over a century, and one that quietly disappeared from mainstream conversation right around the time utility companies finished building the infrastructure that made them billionaires. Funny timing, right? What we're talking about today is telluric current harvesting, the practice of drawing low-voltage electrical current from the Earth's own electromagnetic field using nothing more than a wound copper coil, 2 grounding rods, and a few basic components you can pick up for under $4. You won't power your whole house, but you will generate measurable, real voltage, enough to charge small devices, run low-draw sensors, or act as a backup trickle source for a battery system. And once you understand the principle behind it, you start asking a question they really don't want asked. Why hasn't anyone mentioned this before? The average American household spent $1,650 on electricity last year. That's not a utility bill. That's a subscription to dependency. And unlike your streaming service, you can't cancel it. The grid goes down, which it does more frequently every year. And suddenly your freezer full of food, your medical equipment, your ability to communicate with the outside world, all of it is hostage to a system you had zero say in building. People are spending thousands on solar panels, thousands more on battery banks, and still watching their monthly bill creep upward while the companies delivering that electricity post record profits. Last year, 3 of the largest U.S. utility holding companies reported combined revenues exceeding $60 billion. $60 billion extracted from people who had no alternative because alternatives were never made easy to find. That's not an accident. That's an architecture. And the coil we're talking about today exists at the edges of that architecture, small enough to be dismissed, real enough to matter. Here's the part that gets buried in most history books. Before the modern power grid locked us in, scientists were already pulling electricity from the Earth itself, not as a curiosity, but as a serious field of research. Telluric currents, natural electrical currents that flow through the Earth's crust and oceans, were formally documented as early as the 1860s. Telegraph operators noticed them first. These currents were interfering with their lines, creating phantom signals, sometimes strong enough to operate a telegraph receiver without any battery connected at all. The Earth was transmitting. Nobody installed it. Nobody billed for it. By the late 1800s, researchers across Europe and the United States were experimenting with ground-based current collection. Nikola Tesla, and yes, his name comes up here because it has to, held patents describing systems designed to tap into the Earth's electrical charge. Patent number 685957, filed in 1901, describes a method of utilizing radiant energy through ground connections and capacitive collection. The patent is real. You can look it up. What's harder to find is any record of why development in this area stalled so completely, so suddenly, right as centralized power utilities began their aggressive expansion. Here's what we do know. A decentralized power source, one that anyone could build anywhere for a few dollars, is an existential problem for a business model built on centralized delivery. You don't need to name names or draw conspiracy charts to understand why that technology might not receive the same funding, the same patents, the same textbook coverage as the technology that requires you to pay a monthly bill. The financial motive is obvious. Why would any industry invest in research that eliminates the need for that industry? This wasn't violently suppressed. It was starved, quietly defunded, left out of engineering curricula, replaced in the public imagination by bigger, flashier technology that happened to require infrastructure only large corporations could build. And here we are, 120 years later, paying $1,650 a year for something the ground beneath our feet has been offering for free. Here's exactly how the coil works and what you need. 3 things. That's it. First, copper wire. Specifically, 22 to 26 gauge magnet wire, also called enameled copper wire. You need about 200 feet of it, wound into a flat spiral or cylindrical coil. The winding pattern matters more than the shape. Tight, consistent, with the ends left free for connection. A 200-foot spool runs about $3 to $4 at any electronics or hardware supplier, or online. That's your piece rhymery component. Second, 2 grounding rods. These can be actual copper-clad grounding rods or simply 12-inch lengths of copper pipe driven into moist earth. One serves as your collection point, one as your reference ground. Separation of at least 6 feet improves performance significantly. Third, a blocking diode and a small capacitor. These run under $1 combined from any electronics parts retailer. The diode prevents backflow. The capacitor smooths the collected charge so it's usable. The principle is this. The Earth carries a natural voltage gradient. That gradient shifts with atmospheric conditions, soil moisture, and the planet's interaction with solar wind. Your coil, wound to a specific resonant length and connected between two grounded points, acts as an antenna for that gradient, collecting microvoltages continuously. A properly wound coil in good soil conditions can generate between 0.5 and 2 volts of steady DC current. Not enough to run your refrigerator. More than enough to trickle charge a small battery over 24 hours, power a low-draw sensor array, or run a basic LED circuit indefinitely. That's it. No moving parts, no fuel, no sun required, no wind required, just wire, ground, and physics. Let me walk you through what this actually looks like in the ground. Start with your coil wound and both lead wires exposed, stripped back about ½ inch. Drive your first copper rod into the earth at your chosen location. Moist soil works significantly better than dry. Near a downspout, a garden bed, or a shaded area where moisture holds. Connect your positive coil lead to the first rod. Drive your second rod at least 6 feet away. Connect your negative lead through your blocking diode to this rod. Now connect your capacitor across both leads. Use a multimeter, the kind you can get for $8 at any hardware store, and set it to DC voltage. Touch your probes to the capacitor terminals. In average soil conditions, within about 10 minutes of connection, you will see voltage. It may start at 0.2 or 0.3 volts. Give it 20 minutes. In well-chosen soil, that reading climbs. 40 minutes in, a properly constructed coil in moist, mineral-rich earth will often stabilize between 0.8 and 1.4 volts. That's not nothing. Run that into a small lithium battery management board with a battery attached and you have a continuous passive charging system that costs $4 to build and nothing to operate. Daisy chain 3 of these setups in series and you're approaching the voltage needed to run small electronics directly. At that point, you're not doing a party trick. You're doing something real. Before you run outside with a spool of wire, a few things you need to understand. 1. Soil conditions are everything. Sandy, dry, or highly alkaline soil dramatically reduces output. If your first test shows almost nothing, try a different location before assuming the build is wrong. Areas near natural water sources, clay-heavy soil, or buried organic material tend to perform best. 2. This is a low-power system. It will not replace your grid connection. Anyone telling you this will power your home is either confused or misleading you. What it will do is provide a legitimate, useful trickle source for specific low-draw applications. Sensors, small rechargeable batteries, emergency radio power. That's valuable. That's real. Keep expectations calibrated to what the physics actually supports. 3. Copper connections exposed to soil will corrode over time. Check your ground rod connections every few months and clean or replace as needed. A light coat of conductive grease on the rod-to-wire connection extends the life of your setup significantly. The point is, you have options, and now you understand one of them well enough to actually build it. A $4 coil, some patience, and a willingness to question what you've been told. That's all this takes. They buried this not with legislation and not with force. They buried it with indifference, with the quiet withholding of funding, of education, of public conversation. Because a person who can pull even a small amount of power from the earth beneath their own property is a person who is slightly less dependent. And slightly less dependent, multiplied across millions of households, is a very different world than the one that generates $60 billion a year in utility revenue. Knowledge like this doesn't disappear. It waits. Do 2 things. First, build one. Get the wire, drive the rods, run the test. Let the multimeter show you what the ground is actually doing. Second, share this with someone who'd want to know. Not because it's a revolution, because it's a real thing that real people can actually use and most of them have never heard of it. This channel exists for exactly that reason, to find what's been left out of the conversation and put it back in. If that's something you want more of, you know where the subscribe button is. The Earth has been generating current since long before anyone figured out how to charge you for it. Worth remembering.